So in this video we're going to take a look at the Leica M8. I think it's an incredible camera. It's fast becoming one of my favourite cameras of all time and I absolutely love it. But it's definitely not right for everyone. So should you consider buying a Leica M8 in 2024? So first of all, the typical YouTube disclaimer, I purchased this camera with my own money. Leica haven't had any input. I'm pretty sure that they don't know that I exist, so there's no sponsors for the video. However, if you would like to support the channel and support me, leave a like or a comment below. If you'd like to subscribe, and I will leave some links to Amazon products and my blog and stuff below, so feel free to check those out. I'm not going to go too much into the history of this camera because there's loads of really good resources out there, loads of good videos and blog posts talking about this camera. What I will say is it was first released in 2006 and was actually Leica's first digital rangefinder camera, and it has developed a little bit of a cult following, but most particularly because of the actual sensor in this camera. So we'll take a look around the camera and then we'll have a look at some of those details. One of the first noteworthy things about the camera is the actual build quality. It feels like a tank and it's definitely got a bit of weight to it, definitely got a bit of a heft to it. I'm using it with the Voigtlander 28mm f2 lens, which I think is a really good pairing and haven't really needed to look into all the lenses. Perfectly happy with that. But the actual camera itself feels solid in the hand. Now, the only additional things that I've added is a bit of a rubberized grip on the body, which a lot of people will hate because it kind of spoils the look of the camera, and a thumbs up at the back, as well as a wrist strap as well. Now, I added the grip and the thumbs up purely because I've got quite large hands and found that I was pinching the camera a little bit too much, which ended up fingers started to ache after a long day. And I added the wrist strap purely because I'm clumsy and I am prone to dropping things, and also where I live I'm a little bit nervous about people snatching the camera as well. I will leave Amazon links to all of these things or whatever I can find in the description below if you are interested, but these are just good additions just to make handling the camera a little bit easier. But other than that, it's fantastic to use even for long days. No problem with carrying it around, and I also do pair it with a sling bag that I'm usually carrying around most days anyway, and again I'll leave a link in the description below to that. But other than that, fantastic to use on a daily basis. Feels like using a bit of an old film camera as well, so it's got that kind of, you know, nostalgic feel to it. And one of the things that I do wish is that, like with the Epson RD1, which has got the manual winder on it, which actually activates the shutter, I kind of wish it had that feel to it, just so it feels like you were using a little bit more of an analog camera. But other than that, it's fantastic. Love this camera, great to use on a daily basis. So in terms of standout features and things that I think most people will be interested in, so a couple of the more peculiar things with this camera is that it actually has a shutter speed that goes up to 8,000th of a second. Now, from everything that I've read online, I believe that this was removed in later iterations because Leica were worried about wear on the shutter, which kind of makes sense when you think about it, but having that 8,000th of a second certainly comes in useful on bright sunny days and things. Now, the other thing about this camera in particular is that it doesn't actually have a UV filter on the sensor, so like the IR cut filter, and Leica actually had to send out thread-on filters for the IR cut filter, purely because I think there was a little bit of uproar with some of the customers and things, and basically that's just to stop synthetic blacks, so things like black clothing and things turning a slightly purple colour when you actually photograph them, which might not be an issue for many people, but I think actually just having the IR cut filter feels a bit more like a, you know, more sensible step with a camera like this. So the real main standout feature for this camera is the sensor. Like I say, it's a 10 megapixel CCD sensor. That's not going to get many people excited, apart from the fact that this was actually worked on in conjunction with Kodak, and it really does have a special feel to it. The colours have a certain kind of pop to them. The only way that I can really describe it is if you've ever used like a Sigma Foveon sensor, like I've got the DP2 Merrill and cameras like that. They have quite a unique feel to them because of the actual sensors, and this CCD sensor is exactly the same. It feels like a very different sensor to, say, a standard CMOS sensor. Now that might not appeal to everyone. There might be people looking for, you know, more modern digital mirrorless cameras that have crazy sharp and crazy kind of resolution sensors, but this CCD sensor feels as if you are actually shooting with film. And I know that's the obvious cliche in terms of digital cameras trying to feel like film cameras, but it has such a kind of, you know, kind of soft feel, but a pop to certain colours and things that gives it quite a unique feel. And I think that's quite special, and why it's built up a little bit of a cult following as well. If you Google Leica M8 images and stuff, I'm sure you'll see for yourself that it has quite a unique look to the actual colours and things. So in terms of shooting with a 10 megapixel CCD sensor, I think you have to set your expectations. So in terms of resolution and stuff, obviously it's not huge. I think I printed up to A3 with this and actually been pretty happy with the results, but I do tend to lean into kind of softer images anyway, so I'm not looking for the absolute pinnacle of sharpness and resolution, and I do tend to print on G-Clay with fine art paper, so everything about the process is slightly softer. So quite happy to print with this camera, but in fairness I would say for most people, as long as you're just looking to use it for web or social media kind of size images, you'll be more than happy with it. One of the other things is that with this camera I've virtually never shot with JPEG. I only ever shoot with RAW in it because I always want to have the additional control over the images anyway, and I've actually been somewhat impressed with the actual dynamic range of this camera. Tends to be able to recover shadows pretty well for a camera of this age and a sensor of this size. Also in terms of highlights and stuff, that's where I tend to try and protect the highlights a little bit more, but I'm actually pretty impressed with the dynamic range of it. But there are a couple of downsides which we'll get into. So for me, one of the biggest downsides with this camera is the low light performance. I never shoot above ISO 640 with the camera. I do treat it pretty much like it's a film camera, and I've got a film stock in there that I can't go above ISO 640. So in terms of shooting at night and stuff, tend to avoid it. The only thing that I would say is, depending on the lighting situations, if you've got a bit of artificial light, or you know, you're shooting at dusk, you can still get a pretty decent image out of this. I'm not saying it's completely useless, but I just wouldn't go anywhere above ISO 640 with it. That's definitely one of the big limitations that I've found. If it could have that additional bit of range in terms of ISO and, you know, perform pretty well, I'd be shooting this camera all the time. But I tend to only shoot, as you'll tell from the images, on kind of brighter, sunnier days, stuff where I know that the camera's going to be able to handle that level of exposure. So what are my personal thoughts and feelings about the camera? As you can probably tell, I absolutely love it. I love the images that it produces. I love what I can do to get the kind of images that I want, and you'll tell that they're pretty oversaturated. You know, I go for the softer, kind of more pastel-y feel with a little bit of pop of colour, and this camera really helps me achieve it. And I do think it is that Kodak CCD sensor that's really doing the heavy lifting there. I've got other cameras that I've tried to get the same look and feel with, never really achieved it, but when I started using this Leica M8, pretty much instantly fell in love with the images that it can produce. But obviously it does have those caveats as well, so I know how far I can push the camera, I know where the limitations of it are going to be, but like I said in the intro to the video, it's fast becoming one of my favourite cameras of all time, and something that I certainly won't be letting go of anytime soon. So who do I think the camera's for, and do I think it's a good purchase in 2024? So the only caveat that I would say is pretty much what I spent on this a few years ago, it's held its value. So there's definitely a lot of interest in these cameras still. There's definitely still a market for them. And outside of anything going wrong with it, like I know that the Leica M9 had sensor corrosion issues. I know that the shutter can have problems on the M8, which I've seen a few people that have had to have the shutters replaced on. These are all things that can go wrong with other cameras. So as long as you've got that kind of caveat that, you know, there's always potential it can go wrong. Other than that, I think it's a fantastic camera and something that I would personally recommend to people. The other side to that is that 10 megapixel sensor. You're not going to be printing huge images with it. It is going to be something that's more of a joy to use rather than for professional work, although you can still get some very nice images out of this camera as well. It's one of those cameras that for me is more about the joy and the love of going out and taking photographs and the actual joy that it brings to use the camera rather than the actual final output, which sounds a little bit kind of cliched, but it's one of those cameras that really made me fall back in love with photography again and actually made me want to get out and take images. So I think as long as you know what the limitations are, I'd highly recommend to people, if it's a camera that you're looking at, I would say it's well worth a try. Certainly look at some of the online sellers like MPB and people like that, where you might be able to have a bit of a warranty with it just in case anything does go wrong. But definitely a joy to use and something that I would recommend to most people. If you're watching a video about Leica M8, you probably already know what the caveats are with it though anyway, so but I would say give it a go, see how you feel about it. If you've enjoyed the video, obviously a like and a subscribe goes a long way to support the channel, so I do appreciate that. I am planning on making a few more videos in the coming weeks and things, so look out for those as well. And if you've got any questions about the Leica M8, feel free to leave it in the comments below, and I will link to the blog posts with a few additional images as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in another video.